Hey everyone, this is the rewriter writing in. For today, I wanted to make a bit of a different video than I typically do. This video will be the first of another style of content on this channel, which I am calling Unwritten. For this series, I will be writing the stories of video games and movies that never got made. My first video in this series will be on the cancelled game Star Wars 1313. This game had so much potential to be great, especially when it was revealed to be a Boba Fett origin story, so I'm really excited to make a story about this. With this being said, let's dive into the unwritten story of Star Wars 1313. The game starts with the battle at the arena in Geonosis. A young Boba Fett watches as the mass amount of Jedis begin attacking the overwhelming droid army. His father, Jango, standing next to him, is watching the battle before a purple lightsaber ignites in front of him, being held to his throat. As they are talking, super battle droids appear from behind him and start to blast the Jedi, while Jango burns his cloak with his flamethrower. The Jedi jumps off the platform down into the area and begins fighting the droids. Another Jedi attempts to attack Count Dooku, but are blasted by Jango's West Star blaster pistol. Jango then jetpacks down to the battlefield, attempting to kill the Jedi that held his lightsaber to his throat. As he is down there, a large creature is trampling through the droids and Jedis before it sets its sights on Jango. Boba cries for his father to look out, but he doesn't hear him and gets trampled by the beast. Boba begins to worry that his father is seriously injured, but then sees the Jedi he hunted was running up to him and finally slices his head off. Boba screams, but is held back by Dooku until the fighting in the arena ends. Once the battle had ended, Boba solemnly stepped toward his father's helmet and held it up to his head, vowing to kill the Jedi who murdered his father. Dooku walks up to him, giving him his condolences before escorting him onto a cruiser that would take him back to Kamino. Boba held the helmet in his hands the entire ride back, feeling immense sadness, but also anger that he couldn't save his father. Back at Kamino, Boba began to training his weapon skill and military tactics for the next 10 years. 10 years later, Boba had become the most dangerous combatant in Kamino. Over those 10 years, Boba had seen the Jedi overthrown, hearing that Mace Windu, the Jedi that had murdered his father, had gone missing. As well, he saw the clone army go from being the premier fighting force in the galaxy to being retired by the Empire in favor of regular, inferior soldiers. However, Boba had decided not to get involved with their affairs and dedicated all of his time to training in order to take his father's place as the deadliest bounty hunter in the galaxy. In order to do this, he needed actual experience out in the field. Taun We, an elder among the Kaminoans, informs Boba that Windu, along with what appeared to be a young Jedi, had actually been spotted in Coruscant on the level 1313, and that a group of bounty hunters were tasked with killing him. She explained to him that Cad Bane, a legendary Clone Wars era bounty hunter, would be on this mission, and that he agreed to mentor him, allowing him to get revenge for his father, who Bane respected. Boba knew that this opportunity to get revenge, along with experience, would cement the start of his bounty hunter legacy. Boba then suits up, wearing his father's armor, but removing the leg armor in favor of knee plates for more maneuverability, and strapped his West Star blaster pistols to his sides. His gauntlets had flamethrower capabilities, along with a thin, highly reinforced wire for capturing targets, and metal blades for attacking, as well as allowing him to hang on to walls and other surfaces. He then holds the helmet in his hands for a moment, thinking about his father, vowing to avenge him, and then puts it on as the camera pans out to show his full suit and gear. Boba then boards the Slave One and heads for Coruscant. On his way to Coruscant, Boba receives a holo message from Bane informing him to land at the hangar bay on the first level so that he could meet up with the crew. The Slave One lands onto the hangar bay, where Boba is then confronted by a group of thugs. One of them walks up to him while two others go behind him. The one walking up to him attempts to push him over when Boba grabs his hands, crushing them and bringing the thug to the ground before crushing his face with his knee, and then lands on his feet, blasting the two thugs behind him with his Westars. Cad Bane then approaches him with the rest of his crew, happy to see that he passed his entry trial. Bane then introduces him to the team, which includes Aura Singh, IG-88, and some hired muscle for the job. Bane and Singh were intrigued by being able to train Django's son, but IG-88 was none too pleased with having someone with no experience on a team to hunt a Jedi, and treated him coldly. However, Boba ignored him, as his only priority was hunting down Windu, and didn't care if he was liked or not, especially by a droid. Before entering into the transport shuttle, they were stopped by a group of stormtroopers who demanded what their business was in Coruscant, to which they explained that they were bounty hunters on a mission ordered by the Empire High Command. After being let past, the crew then went into the transportation ship that would bring them down to level 1313. In the shuttle, Bane explained to Boba that level 1313 was dangerous, and that they couldn't trust anyone down there. He continued to explain that the Jedis were being hunted, so if they spotted Windu or his apprentice, they would not hesitate to kill him. Boba then explains that he will not hesitate to kill them either. Bane smiles, knowing that Boba will do great on this mission. As they are lowering deeper into the underbelly of Coruscant, the light from the sun grows dimmer and dimmer until it can't be seen anymore, covering the Undercity in a thick layer of darkness, aside from all the neon lights of the cities found in the lower levels. Out of nowhere, the ship gets knocked to the side as a group of mercenaries led by Dengar begin boarding the ship. Dengar shouts that he knows that Bane is on the mission to kill Windu, but that his crew is on the same mission, and they'll kill Bane in order to get to Windu first. Boba then pulls out his Westars and begins to line up and fire his shots gunslinger style, killing 6 guys in rapid succession, while quickly turning around and scorching one of them with his flamethrower. IG-88 whips out his DLT-20A blaster rifle and begins spinning his torso in circles, blasting thugs all around his position, while Aura Singh pulls out her DX-13 blaster pistol, running towards a mercenary before tackling him and putting a laser into his head. Finally, Cad Bane pulls out a rifle that he doesn't normally use, the EE-3, and begins knocking targets down with its burst fire capability. After the fight lasts for a few minutes, Dengar's thugs all begin to die as he flees the ship. Even though the leaders of Bane's crew stayed alive, most of his hired muscle had been killed. Bane then asks if Boba is okay, and he replies with a head nod. Bane explains that it was good that he was alright, because that kind of thing won't stop as long as they are down here. Once they arrive at level 1313, the group split up, with Bane and Boba going north, and Singh and IG-88 going south. As well, Bane explained that if they were to find Windu, they were going to call in for backup first before engaging him. With their mission priorities set, the two groups set out to find Windu and his apprentice. Boba and Bane begin by scouting out the north part of the city, going into clubs and bribing the bartenders and bouncers of the information that they had, while showing them a holographic wanted poster of Windu. One of the bouncers said that he had seen that guy before, skulking around the slums near the club that they were at. After Bane gave him a big handful of credits, they set off to look for Windu. As they headed down the alley, they noticed that there was a scuffle going on, with a burly Weequay thug and a smaller human male, around the same age as Boba. Bane told them to hang back a bit and see what would happen next. He continued to explain that there weren't many humans who lived down there, so he might know where Windu was. Surprisingly, the human was able to best the Weequay, to which Boba and Bane looked at each other and then began to tail the human. He inadvertently led them to what looked like a safe house. Out of nowhere, a purple lightsaber ignited, with a blue lightsaber following suit, and they began sparring. Boba's body was completely still for a second, knowing that this was the man he had trained for 10 years to kill. Bane then went on the comms to signal to Singh and IG-88 that they had located the target. Laser blasts could be heard, with Singh replying that they were under attack by another ambush by Dengar and his thugs. Boba curses, saying that if they don't strike now, they could lose him forever. Before Bane can grab a hold of him, Boba charges in and begins blasting at Windu, who is able to deflect his lasers. Windu could be heard telling his apprentice to retreat, but the apprentice stayed to fight the young bounty hunter. Boba was chasing Windu, even managing to throw a mini tracker on the back of Windu's robes, not even paying attention to the apprentice who took a swing at him that would have sliced him in two if Bane hadn't thrown himself in front of the lightsaber. Boba turned around and saw Bane lying on the floor, bleeding out. Boba yelled, charging at the apprentice and knocking him to the ground. The apprentice then force-pushed Boba, sending him flying back, but luckily, Boba was wearing his father's jetpack and was able to stabilize himself in the air before firing his wire at the apprentice's hand, disarming him of his lightsaber. Boba then flew back at the apprentice with force, knocking him to the ground. They then began to engage in a hand-to-hand combat fight, with the apprentice and Boba trading blows before the apprentice force jumps over him and attempts to sabotage his jetpack. However, Boba knew that this was his strategy, and right as he flipped over him, Boba ducked for a moment and then slashed the apprentice's neck with his arm blades on his gauntlet. The apprentice dropped to the ground, bleeding out all over his robes. Boba then runs back to Bane, who is barely alive. Boba scrambles to keep him alive by attempting to apply a special healing gel to Bane's torso, but Bane stopped him, saying that it was his time to go. Boba took off his helmet, appearing as a scared young man with tears in his eyes, saying that it was his fault that Bane was dying. Bane shook his head, saying that he understood the anger that Boba felt towards Windu, and that in his younger years, he would have done the same thing. He finally says to take down Windu and exact revenge for his father, before collapsing in the young bounty hunter's arms. Just then, Singh and IG-88 arrive at the scene, and Singh puts her hand on Boba's shoulder, explaining that Bane was one of the greats when it came to bounty hunting, and that she had learned so much from him. However, she informed him that all the blaster fire would lead the Coruscant Underground Police to them, who wouldn't just arrest them, but who would kill them. Boba then had to leave Bane, but not before he took his EE-3 in honor of him, and then walked over to the dead apprentice, cutting off his Padawan braid as a symbol of his first target kill as a bounty hunter, and stuck it on his armor. Boba and them then leave the scene, with Boba telling them that he had placed a tracker on Windu, and that Windu had headed off-world to the planet of Kashyyyk. Once they got back to the hangar bay, since it was just Boba, Singh, and IG-88 left, they took the Slave 1 and headed out for Kashyyyk. On the way, Singh suggested that Boba dye his armor so that he would blend into the environment better, since he was wearing shiny blue armor, which didn't look out of place in Coruscant, but would look so in Kashyyyk. Boba then began to dye his armor, choosing a green, tan, and brown color scheme that would match the many forests of Kashyyyk. The camera then pans to the door, where Boba opens it, and it resembles his classic armor from the films. Singh compliments his style, saying that it looked perfect for the job. Once they reached the planet, Boba slung his rifle over his shoulder and explained that his tracker directed them west of the hangar bay. Singh expected to see Wookiees all over the place, but then remembered that when the Empire took over, they imprisoned all of the Wookiees and put them into labor camps. Boba and the team then began to follow his tracker. After they had walked for a solid hour, the tracker on his wrist began to flash, signaling that they were close. They then saw a cabin, and knew that Windu had to be in there. Boba then explained to them that this looked like a trap, but that Windu would be the one who would be caught off guard. Boba had IG-88 and Singh go in first, while Boba would blend into the environment. Once they opened the cabin, it was empty, with only a bonfire lit in the middle. IG-88 then hears the tracker coming from another room, and when he investigates, he accidentally trips a wire on the bottom of the room, and a spike trap deploys, impaling the droid to the wall. They then hear the igniting of a lightsaber, and turn around to see Windu flying down at them. He catches Singh off guard by dropping next to her, and kicking her square in the face, sending her flying across the room, knocking her out. With Boba nowhere in sight, Windu attempted to leave the cabin, while simultaneously burning it down so that they could not continue to follow him. However, he didn't account for Boba to be stalking him in camouflage among the trees, and when Windu wasn't looking, Boba jumped down, hitting Windu in the back of the head with his EE-3, putting a few feet between the two of them. Boba and Windu were staring off at each other in a 1v1 duel. Boba noticed that Windu was missing a hand and that his skin looked charred, with his face being disfigured. Boba remarked that Windu looked like hell and that he would put him down for good. Windu replied that just as he had killed his father who wore that armor, he would kill him too. Boba, not letting his anger get the best of him, began to attack Windu with strategy and technique. Windu then rushed Boba, who began firing at him with his Westar pistols. Windu blocked the attacks, while simultaneously slicing one of the pistols in half. Boba holstered his other pistol, and with his jetpack flew around the room, firing his EE-3 blaster in bursts at him. However, Windu was able to grab one of the lasers in midair and sling it back at him, bouncing off of a wall and hitting the jetpack, knocking it out of commission. Boba dropped to the ground with a thud as Windu jumped into the air with his lightsaber slashing down, but Boba was quick enough and lifted up, clashing Windu's lightsaber with his own collapsible vibro sword. The two began dueling, with Windu's lightsaber clashing against Fett's sword, with sparks flying in the air. Boba was able to cut Windu in the arm, dropping his lightsaber for a moment before ducking another slice that would have killed him, but only lopped off a bit of his robe. Windu then picked up his lightsaber and began deflecting more of Boba's attacks. Boba then surprised him with a flamethrower attack right in the torso, which began to burn Windu. He howled in pain, removing the rest of his shirt until his scarred torso was visible, and began swarming Boba with a flurry of attacks. His lightsaber strikes began to slash and discolor the armor, while also burning his skin underneath. He then swung up, which knocked the helmet off the young man, who was bleeding from his mouth. The two then charged at each other, with Boba sliding under him and cutting off his right leg. Windu screamed and fell to the ground. Boba stood over the wounded Jedi, who lay before him in blood. Windu attempted to swing one of his last desperate attacks at him, but Boba kicked the saber out of his hand, which deactivated it. Boba pointed the sword at Windu, who was at his feet defeated. Windu then began to remark that Boba would never make it in this galaxy, and that the Empire would swallow him up, while also claiming that Boba would never be anything like his father, and that he would always be weak. Boba then exclaimed that his father was not weak, and that it was cowardly, according to his so-called Jedi code, to cut off his father's head like that, and that through that action alone, Windu had sealed his own fate. Before Windu could utter another insult, Boba cut off Windu's head, exacting revenge for his father. He then limped over to Windu's tattered robe and put it on the back of his armor as a cape that symbolized his victory over Windu. Boba then limped over to Sing, bringing her back to consciousness, and then over to IG-88, who had been impaled, but his core processor remained intact. Once he got the two wounded bounty hunters back to the Slave One, he fled back to Coruscant to bring them back to their ships. Sing explains to Boba that he did well, and that his father would be proud of him. Once they got back to Coruscant, IG-88 stumbled back to his ship without so much as a thank you. But Sing did, while also explaining to him that his father, for a time, was what was known as a journeyman protector on the planet of Concord Dawn, where his father got that armor that Boba was wearing now. She explained that Jango was the leader of this group, and that after he was exiled, they have searched for a leader ever since, but had not found a worthy one. She explained that this would be an opportunity to learn about his father's past, and learn more about the man he was. Boba nodded, saying that he appreciated the tip, and that he would look into it. With a salute goodbye, Aurra Sing blasted off. Boba then hopped into his Slave One and plugged in the coordinates for Concord Dawn. And that's the end of my story. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought about it down in the comments below. Let me know if you were looking forward to Star Wars 1313 as much as I was. If you enjoyed this video, then consider leaving it a like. And if you enjoy Star Wars content, then consider subscribing to the channel, where I will cover a lot more of it in future videos. Thanks again, and this is the Rewriter writing out.